Welcome to Taxpayer Empowerment. I'm Jose Melendez, Campaign Director for the Taxpayer Protection Project at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Today we're joined by Bill Aylshire, attorney, former Travis County tax collector, and Travis County judge, and longtime open government advocate. Bill has been involved in some of Austin's most consequential public policy battles, including Project Connect, Austin's 2024 open meetings violation, Hays County's 2025 meetings violation, and so much more. Bill, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So for the listeners who may not know or follow Austin politics very closely, I mentioned Project Connect at the top. Give us the basics. What is Project Connect and why is this such a controversial project?
Well, in 2020, during COVID, the city council proposed a property tax increase. It was a huge increase, over 20% increase in city taxes for what they said would be a light rail, a citywide traffic easing transit project. Now, the ballot was 235 words long, and it promised all kinds of stuff. And then in addition to that, the city council put out a route map showing that 20 miles of light rail would be built. It would connect to the airport. Far north Austin to far south Austin. You could get on a train and far south or north and end up at the airport if you wanted to, or come downtown. It's going to have downtown. They weren't going to put the rail lines on the street level because that would cause traffic problems in downtown. So they had a tunnel that they were going to use, and it was going to be a tourist attraction, $2 billion tunnel with shopping and live music and restaurants and all of this in there. And the voters approved that 58%, that tax increase. Well, why it's controversial is because the voters were tricked into voting for that, because that is not what they're getting now for their money. They're getting less than half of that, but the full tax increase is there. And why it's controversial is because that tax, 21% of the taxes people pay the city of Austin in their city property tax bill is going to Project Connect, even when the city can't balance its budget, and yet they're not getting what they paid for.
So supporters are obviously promised a transformational transit system back in 2020. When you look back today to what they were promised and where we are now, is it the same thing?
It's not. And I have my clients include that we sued over this, and included Dirty Martin's, 100-year-old business in the university area, because the rail was going to run right over that building. Gonzalo Barrientos, Ora Houston, Susana Almanza, Margaret Gomez, all Democrats, by the way, and we sued because voters were lied to. We call it a bait and switch, and the city should not be allowed to trap its taxpayers into a tax that would last forever, based on lying to them to get those taxes. If we were in consumer protection, that's what we'd be calling it. But it's a bait and switch.
So, Bill, one of your consistent concerns has been transparency when it comes to what taxpayers should know. What do you think taxpayers aren't getting from the City of Austin, Austin Transit Partnership, and others?
Austin Transit Partnership has a motto. They say they prioritize transparency. And I don't know whether to laugh or gag when I hear it, because I can't tell you how many public information requests they have rejected and are hiding information. Even now, they're hiding information about their application for federal funding. Oh, one of the other promises they made in 2020 was that at least 47% of the $7.1 billion cost that they told voters it would cost for those rail miles would be federally funded. Well, they're applying for federal funds, but they're concealing all the correspondence they're having with the Federal Trade Administration back and forth about that federal project. Now, Secretary Duffy changed the rules on the transit federal funding, and said that they must survive a rigorous cost-benefit analysis. Well, there's no way that Project Connect could survive a rigorous cost-benefit analysis, considering how much it cost over $830 million a mile to build it, $200,000 per passenger. It's not. The way I sum it up is it's illegal, it's unaffordable, it's inefficient, it's a mistake.
That's right. What lessons do you think lawmakers and taxpayers should take away from Project Connect when you're thinking about the next bond or transit measure that's going to come about for voters?
This is a little geeky, but your property tax is made up of two parts. It's one for maintenance and operation. It's to fund the operation of the government. That's part of the tax, and it is restricted to just being used for that purpose. The other part is to pay off bonds. When bonds are issued, those bonds have to be paid off. It's called a debt service tax. What is unique about this is that was not a bond election in 2020 for Project Connect. It was an increase in the operating tax. That is not supposed to be used to pay off bonds. And yet what they're doing is they're giving the money to an entity they created called Austin Transit Partnership. When I say they, the city created. And then they're issuing bonds. Well, our argument in court is if the law restricts you and you can't use that kind of property tax to pay off bonds, then you can't launder it to an entity you created and let them use that money for bonds. So we need the legislature to look at this as a unique example that if it became the role model elsewhere, you would lose control of the tax increases that the legislature has tried so hard to give property tax relief, and Austin keeps undermining that.
So we touched on transparency. Let's go a little bit deeper on that end. So one of the reasons taxpayers can even investigate a project like Project Connect is because we have a good but somewhat flawed sunshine law called the Texas Public Information Act. So the Texas Public Information Act is an idea that government works for the people and they should have access to their government. Do you think that principle is still being held today?
There are so many ways governments get around complying with that. They'll stall. In some cases, they'll just ignore the request. Most people don't have the resources to go sue and enforce that act. They'll give them an extraordinarily high cost for producing the records, which overcharge people. They'll just delay by go through the process of asking the Attorney General for a ruling when they know they're going to lose. And they'll do tricks like they'll turn over to the Attorney General what they say is a representative sample of the records instead of all of the records, and use that as a way to finagle later not to release the records. I say that it is an indication of a bad attitude about who owns the government when you see public entities not obey something as simple as the Public Information Act or the Open Meetings Act. If you don't believe in transparency, then you don't believe in our system of government, which is it's owned by the people. It's not the public officials' government; it's the people's government.
So, obviously, you've spent years helping citizens obtain public records. You mentioned some of the tactics. Do you care to share some examples of what that looks like? Some of these delay or even cost tactics that they use?
I was consulted about one down in South Texas a few years ago where they were looking for financial records. I think it was for a school district. And that's the kind of thing that if they've got a QuickBooks system or the software, they push a button and print out the reports. They gave them a $400,000 cost estimate for it because they said people would have to screen each page of the financial records. That's just it's stuff that shows a horrible attitude about it. The legislature's been pretty good about trying to protect that right of people to see records. But every session, more and more exceptions get to be made to that, and the Open Meetings Act. We just had an example this week with the Austin City Council where they're buying these peak gas generators, and they took that item into executive session, voted on it in executive session, and now they're saying they're not going to tell anybody how they voted and what they did. And that, unfortunately, the legislature has put an exception in the Open Meetings Act that allows that. So my point is that when you vote for elected officials, make sure they truly believe in transparency, probably even as the number one, because if you've got transparency, you've got an opportunity to actually affect the decisions that government makes. And the other one is hold them to a promise that they're going to help make Austin affordable, because that is, I think, the number one issue going on here in this year, and in our local elections, that'll be the issue. And in truth, that's the issue that underlies the Project Connect controversy. It's unaffordable.
You make a good point. A lot of people can talk good on transparency, but when push comes to shove, are they going to act accordingly? I'm reminded of an example, and it's a reform we ran with last session at the legislature, last two sessions, one that gets at the format in which a document is provided to you by an entity if you requested a record. A lot of times they have it in a certain format, but they send it to you in a different format. Say, for example, they have it in a searchable format.
Yeah, Excel.
Where you have an Excel, but it's a large Excel file, right? What they do is they turn around and they turn that into a PDF and they send it to you. Now you're looking for a specific information within that document,
right?
But when you get a PDF, it's much harder to search.
That's right.
So a lot of times you're having to get an intern or someone on staff to go through that document. By the time you get to the information you want, it may already be too late.
Yeah,
it may no longer be useful.
Well, it's an ongoing battle, and it's one I'm proud to fight.
So on that end, we've seen a lot of governmental entities use our taxpayer dollars to fight open requests here at the court. So that brings the question: Are these entities choosing litigation over disclosure?
Well, they are, and one of the reasons that I often volunteer my time for these kind of cases is because most folks don't have the resources to go fight for their rights under that act, and so we try to take some of these cases. I've had them against the city of Austin, both on Public Information Act and Open Meetings Act cases, and prevailed. You would hope over time you're teaching those governments a lesson to stop behaving that way.
So obviously, we know that governmental entities are subject to the Texas Public Information Act, but more and more we're seeing a lot of these entities creating these quasi-governments, right? These nonprofit associations or even associations that exist that are mostly funded with our tax dollars. So I think
local government corporations.
Local government corporations.
Which is what Austin Transit Partnership
or even as far-reaching as your trade associations, industry associations that are heavily funded with tax dollars, right? Because they represent governmental entities. It begs the question, should we be looking at the possibility of applying the Public Information Act to those entities?
I think that's a really good question, and one that I was on X commenting about this the other day. The city of Austin, for example, has a huge complex of nonprofit corporations that they farm out services that normally might be performed by the city itself, and especially in the area of human services and so forth. And there's no provision in the contract requiring them to comply with the Public Information Act. Just because a government farms out, contracts out a service that otherwise would have records available to the public from that governmental body should not mean that the public loses access to those records. But that becomes much more difficult for the public to even find where the records are. And then the other thing is that you would hope governmental bodies would continue to monitor what those contractors are doing, and the government itself collect information from their contractors that they could share with the public, so that the public doesn't lose access to information about how their money is being spent and what they're getting for it.
So obviously, when these local governments, these nonprofit entities are fighting these record requests at the court when it comes to disclosing lobbying contracts or any contracts in general, it's a huge transparency problem for the people. When you think about next legislative session, what are some reforms that you think would help strengthen the Public Information Act?
Well, that and the Open Meetings Act needs some strengthening. We've had some case law interpretations of both that really undermine the purpose of why we have those sunshine laws there. One that I would like that I've advocated for a long time, like a broken record, is to get rid of the litigation exception. That is one that when there's a controversy, something controversial has happened, and the public, whether it's the news media or just the general public, wants to see the information about what's behind that. If there's the potential for a lawsuit to be filed, not just if a lawsuit is filed, the governmental body is able to withhold those records because they relate to litigation. That makes no sense at all. Sooner or later, that information might be acquired if there is a lawsuit, by the parties in discovery, and then it has to be disclosed to the public as well. But that there also may never be a lawsuit. So at the time when you've got the most controversial things of all that are going on and might lead to litigation, just because it's going to lead to litigation, the information gets shut down. The public doesn't get to see it. That's one that's real easy. Just repeal that section. Just repeal the litigation exception. The other one is in the area of the law. The Public Information Act says that governmental bodies must promptly supply public information. Promptly. Mm-hmm. And it defines it as soon as possible under the circumstances, without delay. But there's no enforcement mechanism. You can sue if they refuse to give you the records, but if they just stall, you can't go get a court order for that, because it's not part of the allowance that's given in the Act for its enforcement. It's only if they refuse to give you the records. Well, they cynically sit back and go, I'm not refusing to give you records. I'm just not doing it today or tomorrow or next month. So we could fix it. We could help improve the enforcement side on that bill.
So at the very top of the conversation, we're talking about Project Connect. Let's broaden the scope just a little bit, talk about City of Austin's spending habits. So obviously, taxpayers have watched city budgets, tax collections grow substantially over the last decade. So a simple question for you, what's driving that growth?
Well, a part of it is that we have had a tax abatement policy and use, I call it fanning the flames of growth. Austin is a beautiful place, and it's got all kinds of resources that would attract businesses here. But what we have done is attract some huge, super wealthy new workers to move to Austin with their companies that have added to the burden of governmental services and schools and so forth, but given tax abatements to those companies, so they're not paying their fair share. They're not paying for growth, their impact on growth. That's one factor. Another factor is the city of Austin has a culture. I've observed them back during my time in office as well as since, that is absolutely insensitive to the difficulty that small businesses and homeowners have to pay those property taxes. Zillow did a study here nationwide a couple of years ago, and it was in the Austin Business Journal, about talking about how property tax becomes as a percentage of housing cost. And one sentence in that report just jumped out at me. It said, the city with the highest percentage of housing costs that is property tax, Austin, Texas. And we've got a mayor and city council, except for one, Mr. Duchin. I just don't recognize that they're taxing too much already. And they just cannot seem to stop it and to curtail unnecessary and wasteful spending. That's one of the reasons why Save Austin Now had a petition after the election in November of last year, when the city asked for a big tax increase and voters overwhelmingly, 63%, turned them down. But Save Austin Now has a petition to amend the city charter and require an outside comprehensive audit be done on a regular basis to help identify these areas of waste and help show them and the public where they could cut that budget. But I just don't see much signs that a majority of the Austin City Council get it yet at all. And so that's why the elections are going to be very important this year, with 5 seats up. As of yesterday, the 4 incumbents that are running for re-election all have opponents. So we're going to have a discussion about this, and we'll be in court, we'll be on the streets, we'll be at the ballot trying to fight back and get the message through to Austin that you can't do things like go out and spend $1.1 million to develop a new logo. And that's just, it's ridiculous.
On that, before I ask the next question, I took it upon myself to say I grabbed the new City of Austin logo, and I put it through AI, and I told it, please produce the same logo with just the TBPF name. And it did it in just a matter of seconds.
Exactly.
But the idea that I did that in just a few seconds and someone got paid $1 million to produce that logo is just mind-boggling to me. It's a waste of taxpayer resources.
It is mind-boggling. And Save Austin Now did something similar to that. As part of the political campaign for the petition, they took the little stylized A and it had the word Austin under it. That's the trademark.
Sure.
And they put audit. So we have audit Austin, and they hired the city manager hired an outside lawyer to send a letter threatening a trademark lawsuit against Sandpack, my client.
Sure.
And so we turned around and sued them. Said we first of all, the city manager doesn't have the authority to establish the logo for the city. The city council is the only one that can do that, and they're making parody use. It's free speech use, just like you would do. You
Sure.
could take that, and especially if you're making fun of the fact that it's not funny that they spent $1.1 million, but it's a symbol of the waste of those hard-earned taxes that they're collecting, that they keep driving up more and more and more. And in the context, when you look at Austin's budget situation, they had a $30 to $50 million budget deficit, but they spent $185 million on Project Connect last year out of that budget. That's not affordable. You've got to rethink this.
On that note, when people think about the City of Austin and the budget, a lot of times taxpayers hear that the city's adopted yet another record budget. What kind of questions should they be asking the city? How can they best hold the city accountable?
Well, I last year there was some good kind of crowdsourcing of the records on how the city was spending, and I thought it was very helpful for not just reporters, but lay people to go in there, people with tech skills, to go into the city records available online and show examples of how they're doing. And that activity has continued. Jen Robichaud and others on X have continued to pull those examples out, and they're watching the weekly council agendas for examples of things that are just is wasteful. And then you see something come along like a $1.3 billion new convention center. Like the convention center, I saw a stat on that was interesting, is over the last year, they closed the convention center in April of last year. You would think if the convention center is bringing in hot tax or hotel tax, you would think, well, without a convention center, we're going to lose some tourism, right? We're going to lose some hot tax. It did not go down. The overall collections, in fact, are up a little bit for the city of Austin for hot tax for the last year without a convention center. And so do you need to spend $1.3 billion for that? So those are things that, these are all issues that I think candidates for city council are going to have to be talking about this year. And we appreciate programs like yours and others that get the word out to people so they can see, I want to know what you're doing about transparency. I want to know what you're doing about affordability and participate not just in the election, but get interested in what they're doing in those weekly meetings. Go down there and testify. We've now got a change in the Open Meetings Act that actually gives people a right to be able to speak on each agenda item for a reasonable period of time, and take advantage of that. They need to hear from people that don't want to see more money spent, because they're always hearing from people who want them to give them money.
So, Bill, as a final question, when you think about one or two reforms that the city or maybe even the state can come in, can adopt to right-size government, to be better fiscal stewards of our tax dollars, what would those be?
I think that most of all, we need to have elected officials take a breath, sit back, and remember who they are and who the people are, and have a better attitude about how difficult it is for people to pay taxes. If you have that attitude, which is what I gained as being the guy that had to collect those taxes, if you have that attitude, I think you're automatically more conservative about the way how much you will take from them and how you will use it when you get it. And so if I could just change one thing, I would say, in their hearts, begin to understand how hard it is for people to keep their business going, to stay here in Austin, especially with their children, and keep their homes here. And if they had that attitude, we wouldn't have some of these problems.
I think you hit the nail on the head. Whether it's taxes, spending, or housing, it all comes back to the overarching theme of affordability.
Indeed.
Well, Bill, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for your continued leadership.
Thank you.
Until next time, I'm Jose Melendez reminding you, it's your money, your government, and your voice.